anyone else feel like they're in a constant battle with mosquitoes, especially when the monsoon season hits. It's like they're everywhere. And it seems like more and more people are looking for natural ways to keep them at bay.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that trend too.
So that's what we're going to dive into today. We're looking at this plant called Neaz Bo.
Neaz Bo.
Neaz Bo, and all the research that's being done on it as a natural mosquito repellent, something that actually works.
Sounds good to me.
So we want to figure out, can this Neaz Bo plant actually help us control those mosquito populations, especially when they just explode during those rainy months?
That's the big question, isn't it? What does the science actually say?
Well, first off, what is this Neaz Bo plant? Turns out it might be something you're already familiar with.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's Ocimum basilicum L, which is the fancy scientific name for, you guessed it, sweet basil.
Basil. Interesting.
That herb we all know and love from our kitchens and gardens, part of the mint family.
Which makes sense given that strong aroma.
Right? And even the name is pretty cool.
Oh, how so?
So Ocimum comes from the Greek word for smell, and Basilicum actually means king or royal herb.
It does have a regal air about it, doesn't it? Especially with all those different varieties.
It does. And speaking of varieties, it's got all sorts of names depending on where you are.
That's right.
You'll hear it called Neaz Bo in some places, or just basil, and even other names depending on the region.
It just goes to show how language can vary even when we're talking about the same plant.
Totally. But it's important to be specific here. We're focusing on Ocimum basilicum, not its close relatives like Tulsi or holy basil.
Right. Different plant, different properties.
Exactly. And sometimes Neaz Bo itself can actually refer to other fragrant plants too, not just basil.
So it can get a little tricky.
It can. But for our deep dive today, we're sticking strictly with sweet basil, Ocimum basilicum.
Gotcha.
Okay, so picture this. It's a leafy annual plant, grows maybe a foot or two tall, with these fragrant oval leaves, the ones you use in your pesto.
Delicious.
Right, and they grow on these square stems, and it has these delicate little white or pink flowers.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And it's native to places like India and other parts of Asia with those warm, rainy climates.
Perfect breeding grounds for mosquitoes, unfortunately.
Yeah, prime mosquito territory. And that brings us to why we're talking about it today.
It's that strong scent, right?
Exactly. That strong basil scent is what we're interested in.
Yeah.
It makes sense that people in those mosquito-prone regions might have used it traditionally to keep the bugs away.
Makes perfect sense. And you know what? The science is actually starting to back that up.
Really?
Yeah. More and more studies are showing that sweet basil can be both a repellent, keeping mosquitoes away, and a larvicide, actually killing their young.
Wow, that's impressive.
Isn't it? Researchers in Indonesia, for instance, found that sweet basil essential oil can actually kill Aedes aegypti mosquitoes.
And those are the ones that carry dengue fever, right?
That's right. So not only annoying, but dangerous, too.
Absolutely. So how effective is this basil oil?
Well, another study found that even a 30% concentration was enough to provide really good repellency against those dengue mosquitoes.
Like, how good are we talking?
Over 80% repellency for 6 hours.
6 hours? That's pretty significant.
It is. It's definitely encouraging if you're looking for natural ways to protect yourself. And it's not just effective against the adults either.
Oh, what about the larvae?
Researchers have found that extracts from sweet basil leaves can also be effective against the larvae of the Asian tiger mosquito.
Okay, so that's two different types of mosquitoes.
Exactly. And it gets even better. They've also done studies on Anopheles mosquitoes.
And those are the ones that spread malaria, right?
Yes, those are the ones. Even a relatively low concentration, just 6% of the essential oil, showed repellency against them for over 4 hours.
That's amazing.
They even managed to formulate it into a cream with similar results.
A cream, wow.
Yeah, pretty cool, right?
So it sounds like it works against a variety of different mosquito species.
It really does. Though it's worth noting that the exact level of effectiveness can change a bit depending on the specific study.
Oh, how so?
Well, it depends on the type of basil used, the mosquito species being targeted, and even the exact methods used in the research.
That makes sense. So I'm curious, what is it about basil that mosquitoes find so repulsive?
It all comes down to the chemical cocktail that basil produces.
A cocktail.
Yeah, a mix of natural chemicals, especially what we call volatile compounds. They're the ones that give basil its characteristic strong smell.
Ah, so it's the aroma that's doing the work.
Exactly. Things like eugenol, linalool, and camphor are present in basil, and they're known to have repellent effects.
And eugenol is the one that actually reduces mosquito landings.
You got it. And there's more. Estragol, citronellol, limone. Basil's got a whole arsenal of compounds that mosquitoes don't seem to like.
So how do they work? Do they, like, overpower the mosquito's sense of smell or something?
It's thought that they interfere with the mosquito's sensory receptors, the way they detect us. It's like jamming their signals.
Oh, so they can't find us as easily.
Precisely. But there's more to it than just masking our scent. Some of these compounds, like eugenol, are actually toxic to insects.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about repelling them, it can actually harm them, too.
That's right. And there are other components in basil that can disrupt insect cells or even have neurotoxic effects.
So it's like a multi-pronged attack.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's likely a combination of these different actions that makes basil so effective.
Okay, so let's say I'm sold. I want to use basil to keep the mosquitoes away. What are my options?
Well, the research looks at a lot of different possibilities.
Like what?
There's the essential oil, of course, or you could use extracts from the leaves. Some people even just crush fresh or dried leaves.
Okay, that's pretty simple.
It is. And there are other methods people have tried, like planting basil around their homes or using basil-infused oil sprays.
Oh, like a DIY repellent.
Exactly. And some people even burn dried basil leaves.
Huh? Interesting.
Then, of course, there are those repellent creams we talked about earlier.
All right, the ones they developed from the essential oil. It's amazing how many different ways people are using basil.
It really is. And it all ties back to the traditional uses, especially in those monsoon-prone regions we talked about.
Like in India, right?
Yep, in India, where basil originated, it's been known for keeping insects away for centuries. You'll often find it planted near doorways and windows.
I've heard that certain types of basil are considered particularly effective.
Oh yeah, definitely. Lemon basil and cinnamon basil are two that often get mentioned.
And I've also heard about people in India simply placing fresh basil leaves in bowls during the rainy season or sprinkling dried leaves around.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those traditional practices passed down through generations.
It's fascinating how this knowledge has persisted.
It is. And it's not just ancient history either. The recent studies in Indonesia show that this interest in basil for mosquito control is still very much alive today.
Yeah, and it's cool to see science catching up with those traditional practices.
Absolutely. Now, when scientists really dig into the chemical makeup of basil, they use some pretty sophisticated tools,
Like what?
like GCMS. It's a technique that lets them identify all the different compounds present in a sample.
And what have they found?
They've identified a whole range of compounds, but the exact composition can vary quite a bit between different types of basil.
So different types of basil, like lemon basil versus cinnamon basil, will have different chemical profiles.
Exactly. We call these different types chemotypes. And the dominant compounds in a particular chemotype, like linalool or estragol, can really affect how well it works as a repellent.
Okay, so one type of basil might be better at repelling mosquitoes than another.
That's right. And they've also identified the specific compounds that are effective against mosquito larvae, things like methylchavicol and methyl-eugenol.
So it's like each type of basil has its own special blend of mosquito-fighting chemicals.
Exactly. It really highlights how important it is to understand the specific chemical makeup of a plant when we're talking about its medicinal or pesticidal properties.
I see. So all this research is great, but are we at the point where, like, the World Health Organization is recommending basil-based repellents?
Not quite yet. We haven't seen any major health organizations formally recommending basil on a large scale.
Okay, so it's not mainstream yet.
Not yet. However, the scientific evidence is growing, and we're seeing more and more research institutions getting involved, which is a really good sign.
So it's gaining recognition.
Definitely. And I think this interest in natural alternatives is only going to increase, especially with all the concerns about synthetic insecticides and insecticide resistance.
Yeah, people are looking for safer, more sustainable options.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about how basil stacks up against other repellents, the ones we're more familiar with. Like, how does it compare to citronella, for example, or even DEET?
Well, some studies have shown that really concentrated basil oil can be just as effective as DEET, or even more so in some cases.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a catch. It really depends on the concentration. Well, those studies that showed basil outperforming DEET were using 100% basil oil. Lower concentrations might not be as effective as the standard DT concentrations we're used to.
Okay, so concentration matters.
It does. And of course, DT has been around for a long time, and it has a pretty well-established safety profile. Although there have been some rare cases of toxicity reported, it's generally considered safe when used as directed.
Right, and there are other synthetic options out there too, like picaridin.
That's right.
So it sounds like there's still a lot we need to learn about how basil compares to these other repellents.
There is. We need more research to really understand how different types of basil, different formulations and different concentrations stack up against each other and against those established repellents. It's not a simple answer.
That's true. But what's the main takeaway for our listeners?
The key thing to remember is that sweet basil, Ocimum basilicum, has some serious potential as a natural mosquito repellent and larvicide.
So it's not just an old wives' tale.
Nope, not at all. There's a growing body of scientific evidence to support its traditional use.
And we've given our listeners a good overview of that evidence without getting too bogged down in the technical details.
Hopefully they now have a better understanding of the science behind this natural alternative.
They do.
But here's a thought to leave you with. Given how many different compounds basil contains and its long history of use, what other potential benefits might it hold?
Ooh, I like that.
It's not just about mosquitoes.
Right.
Basil thrives in those warm, humid environments where mosquitoes are also prevalent. What else might it be protecting us from?
Interesting question.
Maybe there are other royal properties of this herb just waiting to be discovered?
You've definitely given us something to think about.
I hope so.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
And until next time, happy exploring.
Happy exploring.